We're adding some sophisticated tools to your jewelry arsenal and picking up some craft standards. This is week 2 of basic training.
It's who I am, a little rare, some savoir-faire, and some mystery, putting it all together, doing what I do, doing what I do.
Hi, I'm Tamara Berg, and today is week 2 of basic training. Today we're going to be working the basics of chain, basic chaining, if you will, and we're going to be making chains so that you can make them into necklaces, bracelets, belts, or whatever. So let's get started. We're going to be working with copper wire, and if you haven't had the chance to already, watch week 1 of basic training where we talked about wire basics. So copper wire comes in lots of different gauges. We are going to be working with 18 gauge wire today. And what we are going to be doing is making the basic component of a chain, which is a jump ring. Now the tool on which jump rings are formed is called a mandrel. You can get fancy jewelers' mandrels. They come in lots of different sizes. They're steel hardened. They're great tools. Or you can use household items. Today we're going to be using a crochet hook. We've also used knitting needles in the past. They're great for using as mandrels on jump rings. So I'm just going to take my 18 gauge copper wire and wind it around my crochet hook. And just turning this like this with my hands, and you'll eventually snug them up a little bit so that they're nice and tight next to each other. Now you can do this with a hand drill placed in a vise, and then you insert your crochet hook or knitting needle into the end of your hand drill and then use the power to turn your crochet hook, but I don't mind doing this by hand. Unless you're making thousands and thousands of jump rings, this way is a pretty easy way to work. So as you're twisting them onto your crochet hook mandrel, you can snug them down and make them nice and tight and uniform. Don't those look great like that? Very professional. Just continue winding, and when you finish winding, you're going to get a coil that basically looks like this. We've used about 3 feet of the 18 gauge copper wire to make this coil, and it ends up making about 40 jump rings, just to give you an idea of what you'll get out of the wire that you're using. So next, we need to cut this coil to make the jump rings. Now there are several different ways that you can cut this coil. The first is just using wire cutters. It's a very easy way, although not a very precise way, to cut your jump rings. So what you're going to do is just cut your coil and then cut the next piece of wire, and you will get a little ring like this. Now the problem with cutting your jump rings like this is that you will have one end that's flush, because that's how wire cutters work. You'll have one end that's flush. The other end will have a little point to it. So what you'll need to do is take your wire cutters after you do that first cut, flip them over the other way, clean off that little pointed cut, and then you'll have a nice solid joint between the two. So I've got this one here. There's my raggedy end. I'm turning my wire cutters over so the flush side is facing that way. Just cut it away, and then we've got 2 flush sides. Now the more standard way to cut jump rings is with a jeweler's saw. It's a little bit like a coping saw, and it has a very fine blade. Now I'm going to show you how to load the blade into this frame. So we've tightened this nut, and the other end of the blade is free floating. Next, what I'm going to do is take the frame and put it up against the edge of my table for some tension. Then I'm just going to load the blade into the other nut, push against the edge of the table, tighten that nut, and we end up with a perfectly tight blade. The other tip for working with a jewelry blade is to use wax. Applying wax to the blade very often as you're sawing helps to keep everything moving smoothly. We're using casting wax here. You can use candle wax as well for this application. This is a jeweler's bench pin. It's made out of hard wood, and it's a very typical jewelry making tool. I've modified this one to put a little V groove in it. I've routed a V groove in, and it's a V because then it will hold lots of different sizes of the coils for our jump rings. I've got my copper wire on my mandrel of a crochet hook, and I'm placing it in the groove. All of this is to stabilize the coil and make it easier to cut. So we've got the mandrel pulled off just a little bit from the front edge of our coil. And I'm going to take my jeweler's saw. You need to be patient, and it does take practice. And we're just going to run the saw through the edge of our coil. Keep going. Here comes our first jump ring. It's coming. It's coming. And there's our first jump ring. Now I have another jig I've made to cut the jump rings. I'll show you how that one works. This is a 3/4 inch piece of plywood, and into it I have drilled several different sizes of holes which will correspond to various sizes of coils. And I've also routed little slots into here to fit the saw in. So here we've got our coil sitting on the mandrel, and I'm just feeding it into the corresponding slot. I'm going to wax up my blade again and then just start cutting. See how they just start to pop off. Now you'll see some of our coils will pop off onto the ground or onto the work surface. Some of them will end up on your saw blade, but it's very easy to just take them right off. And then we've got a pile of perfect jump rings. Because of the way we cut the jump rings with a coil, every end is going to be offset. They're all going to be a little bit open. So in order to fix that, all you need to do is take 2 pairs of pliers and then just close them up, and that will make the assembly of the chain go a little bit faster. You're probably going to want to do about 2/3 of them closed up, and you can always open them and close them again as you need them. So we've got a bunch of our jump rings closed, and then we've got a bunch of them opened. So to assemble our chain, we're going to take one of the opened jump rings, open it just a little bit more. Then we're going to take 2 of the closed jump rings, place them on, close it up, and now we have a 3-link piece of chain. So we're just going to repeat that again. Take one of the opened jump rings, open it up a little bit, add on the 3 pieces of chain that you've already put together and another closed link, close it up, and now you've got a 5-link chain. So just continue this, and when you're finished, what you will have is a basic cable chain. Next, we're going to talk about polishing chains. First rule of polishing chains, you never want to use a wheel or any kind of rotary motorized device to polish chains. I have never done it because I follow the rules, but I have been behind someone who polished a chain on a polishing wheel. What happens is the chain very easily gets caught up in the mechanism and it gets thrown across the room. As I was sitting behind, I was the one who got hit in the back of the head with the chain, which makes a lot of sense about some things, I think. Okay, the easiest way is to use a jeweler's cloth that has rouge embedded into it. These are great cloths. They make a nice shine, and they're very easy to use, especially easy to draw a chain through and get a nice finish to it. Now, if you've got a chain that's really grimy, you can actually use a rock tumbler and put in it an aqueous solution with your chain and what is called steel shot. It's little bits of steel, and then tumble it, and that really cleans out all the nooks and crannies of your chain. You do want to make sure that your steel shot, though, is either too big or too small to get stuck inside the links of your chain. Here are a couple of chains that I have made. So we've got that basic cable chain, and this one is 2 sets of links. The next chain I have is again a double chain. It's a single, then a double, but the double chain links are crossed over. And then I've made a much larger diameter brass link mixed with 2 copper links to make a pretty double colored chain. So think of all the possibilities. A crochet needle, a saw, and some wire. Fantastic! Okay, your drill for next week, recruits. Watch the Trixie 2-step episode where we use oval links to make a bracelet. And if you don't watch it, I'm going to make you drop and give me 40 links. Make something beautiful. I'll see you next time.
To get step-by-step instructions, download this week's design guide.